I am the chosen one. I am the one that has been selected to wield the legendary Ashbringer to smite my foes and to bring ruin upon the Legion and to drive them back once and for all.
Oh, wow, that's cool. You got the Ashbringer too. I got it too. I ain't ever played no Paladin before, but hell, I think the Ashbringer looks pretty cool, so I figure I might as well give it a go.
But I thought I was the chosen one.
No, that ain't true. Everybody's got the Ashbringer. What are you talking about, all them people?
I have the Ashbringer.
Oh, yes, I have the Ashbringer. Yes, of course, I
I'm
have
the
the
chosen one. I'm the vanquished one.
Why is
I'm
everyone
the
excited about the
Ashbringer.
Ashbringer? It's just a weapon,
Chosen
right?
one.
What's the Ashbringer? Hey guys, Evo here. So Legion had a lot to live up to following Warlords of Draenor, which is largely considered the best expansion ever made. I don't know how they could have made that expansion any better. I really love that expansion so much. In all seriousness, Legion had a lot to live up to following Warlords of Draenor. In that expansion, the majority of the player base had lost faith in Blizzard, and the sub numbers reflected that. Blizzard needed to do something to turn that around. And Legion was that something. But did it work? Some of the most influential and most important changes in Legion have likely already been forgotten by the majority of the player base. Throughout the course of Legion, Blizzard made a ton of changes to the base of the game, to the way that systems functioned, and the way that the game played, and the way that it looked, that ultimately just made the game feel more modern and tried to make the game more on par with all its competitors. Graphical updates have been a massive part of this expansion, from the increased view distance that now lets you see across multiple zones, to the animation revamps that were done to both melee and range specs, as well as smaller gameplay changes like making it so that your heroic leap and spells like it can't be cancelled by clicking too far away. Instead, if you move your mouse too far away, the little targeting circle simply just locks at max range, so you don't have to worry about it. By far my favorite change is that they fixed tab targeting. It used to be that you'd have to cycle through targets that you weren't even in combat with in order to get to the target you wanted to attack. In 7.1 they made it, while you were in combat, you only tab between targets you were in combat with, which made tab targeting so much easier to use than before. Gone are the days of spamming tab, cycling through all the enemies on the other side of the room just so you can get to the one right in front of your face. Little things like this had a massive impact on how the game felt to play, and that's not even to get into all the back-end changes that happened. One of the most important changes in Legion was the full implementation of sharding. For those of you that don't know, sharding is basically just advanced cross-realm technology that phases all players across all realms into shards, which is essentially like a mini-server. So, for example, if you had 20 players in Stormwind, but it was just too much for the servers to handle for some reason, the game could split those 20 players into 4 different shards of Stormwind with 5 players each to reduce the stress on the servers. This system is the reason that the Legion launch went so well, and it's the backbone of systems like the new War mode coming in BFA. Sharding opens the door for Blizzard to do all sorts of new things to make the overall game experience better. I know that some people don't like the idea of sharding because it takes away from the idea of server community, and to be honest, I agree, but server community has been dying for many years now, and if we aren't going back to classic or BC days, then I'm more than happy to embrace this new direction of connecting all players rather than trying to cling to the corpse of server community. Legion brought with it so many changes that updated the systems and graphics alike to make the game feel more modern and more on par with other games in the market, and ultimately, that is just a really good thing for the game. Open world content is one of the most important aspects of World of Warcraft because it just ties the game together. No matter who you are, if you're a PvP or if you're a PvEer, it doesn't matter. At some point you're going to be doing world content, whether it's doing world quests for an emissary or you're just leveling up a character. Because of that, it's vital that Blizzard gets the open world content right, and sadly, I think this is one of the biggest failures of Legion. Launch was great. We had 5 zones filled to the brim with world quests, and for the first couple months, it was great. The zones were mostly well done, world quests were still a fresh idea, and the questing was really fun. Suramar was amazing. As the expansion went on, however, the state of world content got worse and worse. By the time 7.2 came out, most of the player base was sick of doing world quests, and they were hoping for some kind of new, exciting content to change things up in 7.2. But they wouldn't get it. 7.2 launched to pretty much universal disappointment. It had a short and uninteresting quest line, and then it was back to doing more world quests. Except now on an ugly green rock. And things didn't improve from there. Argus came out, and once again, it was more world quests on another green rock. World quests made up the majority of world content in Legion. We had invasion points and Syntax farming, sure, but both of these systems fell out of relevance pretty quickly and were not particularly fun to do. Comparing the world content of Legion to some other expansions like Mists of Pandaria, it doesn't hold up. Mob was not a perfect expansion, but Blizzard tried some new things with the world content, and ended up creating a fantastic daily system in the Isle of Thunder, and creating a new type of open world content with the Timeless Isle. With Mob, every patch changed things up in an attempt to keep things feeling different and fresh, and for the most part, that worked, which is what makes it so sad to see Legion just following a basic and generic formula of simply adding new world quests in a different spot. World quests would work great if combined with dailies or elements of the Timeless Isle, but on their own, world quests they're just dull. They are filler content, and that was pretty much all the world content we got out of Legion. There needs to be variation in order to keep things interesting, and Legion just didn't have that. And I would say that's the biggest failure of the world content in Legion. Yeah, there was a lot of it, but it wasn't interesting or engaging. It just served as something you needed to do in order to do the content you actually wanted to do. To be clear on this point, I actually really like world quests. I think they're a great addition to the game, but world quests alone can never be enough to make interesting world content. Oh yeah, Mythic Plus. Mythic Plus was one of the best features to come out of Legion, and I can honestly say that if it wasn't for all the keystones I did throughout the course of Legion, I probably would have unsubbed from the game, and I probably would have left the game. Mythic keystones are probably the best thing added to WoW ever, in my opinion. I absolutely adore them. Dungeons is my favorite kind of content in World of Warcraft, and because of that, it was so sad to me to see dungeons being neglected for years and years, expansion after expansion, and I got excited for the mythic dungeons when they got announced for Warlords of Draenor, but they ended up being a joke.
Alright men, I hope you're ready. Nothing has prepared you for what we will face today. This is a mythic dungeon for mythic raiders. Some of you might die, but that's okay because our druid has a B-res. We need to kill this boss to get our valor. Are you ready?
Oh my god, no, please don't hurt me. I'm sorry for anything I did here. Here, take my epics. I don't need them. Have my epics. I need epics. Here, I don't need them. I'm sorry, please don't hurt me. Please don't hurt me. I'm sorry, please. Here, I'm sorry. Have epics. I'm sorry. You suggested I don't know. Help, please, help. I don't want to die.
Mythic Plus did one thing that made it my favorite feature of Legion, and that's the fact that it brought dungeons back into relevance. In Legion, dungeons were challenging and fun at any point in the expansion. You could always push your key, always challenge yourself, and it was a really fun way to play with your friends. On top of that, Legion dungeons were fantastic. There are a few not very good dungeons. Seat. But, for the most part, all of the dungeons were really well designed with fun and interesting mechanics. For me personally, Mythic Plus is the biggest success of Legion, because it kept my favorite part of the game relevant and challenging throughout the entire expansion. Mythic Plus is a success not only because it was a great addition to Legion, but because it's a great addition to the game. Mythic Plus isn't going anywhere, and venturing into new dungeons and pushing new keys is what I'm most looking forward to in BFA, and in all the future expansions for that matter. So, I would consider that a massive success. Raids, on the other hand, were okay. Raiding in Legion was honestly really disappointing to me. I raided at a lower level this expansion, only clearing the first few bosses of Mythic, but I didn't really have the drive to push much higher than that. I just didn't care. The problems with raiding in Legion is an entirely different video, but suffice it to say, there were lots of frustrating mechanics, and there were genuinely very few standout fights. Most bosses were quite forgettable, with fights like Gul'dan being the exception. For me, Antorus is probably my least favorite raid in the expansion. I don't hate any of the bosses, they're all passable and they all work as intended, but I've never had fun raiding Antorus, and farm runs are torturous to me. Whereas in Hellfire Citadel, I couldn't wait to raid, and I loved every second of it. The design for bosses in Legion just wasn't very fun in my opinion. And that's without getting into all the problems in high-end Mythic raiding that people like Preach have talked about a lot. Legion raiding had some amazing moments, but as a whole, I was pretty let down by raiding this expansion. Yep, well, there's no two ways around this. PvP was a massive failure. It was bad. Removing PvP gear from vendors is still one of the stupidest choices I think Blizzard has ever made. Stat templates are a good idea in concept until you remember that World of Warcraft is an MMO RPG about progressing your character and progressing the gear of your character, and stat templates take away from the core identity of the game. And Prestige just couldn't fill that gap. It wasn't nearly as rewarding as it needed to be. I have never been a serious PvPer, so I can't speak to the more hardcore end of things, but as a casual PvPer, I was far less interested in doing PvP in Legion than I was in, say, Warlords of Draenor. Legion had a lot of random side content that was really innovative and fun and just a good time, and it was completely disconnected from gear progression, and that was one of the biggest positives of the expansion. Something like the Chromie scenario is a great example of how Blizzard can use creativity to make some truly unique and fun content. In the Chromie scenario, you go back in time to save Chromie from being assassinated, but you were doomed to fail the whole time. As you continue to try to save Chromie, you find shortcuts, you find secrets, you get knowledge that you can use to your advantage to make the run go quicker. Eventually, you need to just use all the information you've gathered to get through the scenario as quickly as possible, taking all the shortcuts in order to save Chromie before time runs out. This piece of content struck me as really unique and fun, and it was great, and I absolutely loved it. It just really seemed like Blizzard had fun making it. They didn't just add the Chromie scenario, they also added pet battle dungeons, PvP pet battle achievements, the mail minigame, secret mounts like the Lucid Nightmare, and some amazing micro-holidays.
Oh, hello there. Wouldn't you like to ride my balloon?
But by far my favorite side thing they added in Legion was the Mage Tower. The Mage Tower was one of the best pieces of content that Blizzard has ever made. The Mage Tower gave you a single player boss to fight, and if you defeated it, you would unlock a new skin for your weapon. The amazing thing about this was that they actually made the Mage Tower hard. Trying to get my weapon skin the day the Mage Tower came out was a great experience, and after getting every single Mage Tower skin for every DPS spec in the game and every tank spec in the game, I can truthfully say that I enjoyed every minute I spent in the Mage Tower. Content like the Mage Tower gives me so much hope for the future of the game, and I hope we'll see more stuff like that in the future. Overall, the random side content that was added throughout the course of Legion is some of the best content in Legion, some of the most inspired and fun content to take part in. Bringing out content faster was one of the biggest promises of Legion, and they said they were going to bring out content at a much faster pace so that players never got bored, just like they said they were going to do the expansion before that, and 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 the expansion before that, but this time, they actually did. Legion patches came out at breakneck speed. We got a new patch every 77 days at the start of the expansion. This pattern was only broken with 7.3, but not by that much. All this consistent content led to a lot of players regaining faith in Blizzard because they were actually following through on their promises. They brought out new content so fast in Legion that some people actually started complaining there was too much content. Despite the fact that the patch cycle in Legion was one of the most praised parts of the expansion, I hated it. I think the downsides of it heavily outweigh the positives. Yeah, we got a lot of content on a very regular basis, but as most of the player base quickly realized, it wasn't very good content. It was just world quests. There is no doubt in my mind that the overuse of world quests as open world content is directly tied to the time crunch of trying to get a patch out every 77 days. I personally would rather have content that is actually interesting and fun once every 4 months instead of mediocre content that I don't really care about every 77 days. I'm worried that this patch cycle will continue into BFA and we won't see patches do much more than add a few new world quests in a different location. I hope I'm wrong on that because I don't want that to be the legacy of Legion. Okay, so I'm not scripting this portion of the video because this is something that... This is easily the biggest failure of the expansion. And I have a few things I wanted to get on here, and I'm going to try to keep this short and concise. But gearing and progression was ultimately just a disaster for the entire expansion. Legendaries. I don't need to say anything about them. They were horrible. Who thought it was a good idea to make things randomly drop that determined your playstyle and the power of your character and whether you could be viable in raids or not? I don't know who thought that was a good idea, but it wasn't. And that's why they got rid of it, and they kept rolling it back so you could get them easier and easier and easier and easier. Legendaries were a horrible idea. They were a massive failure. They devalued legendaries and all that stuff. And Titan Forging got brought in the game. Titan Forging was a really bad thing for the game. Best in Slot used to be something you could work towards. You could get certain items and be like, yes, I am not replacing my helm for this tier because I have the best item. And that feeling was a good feeling, and that's something that is gone from the game. Because whenever you get an item, you're like, yes, I got that item, but could be better. And that's just not a good feeling. That's not a rewarding experience. And finally, I just want to touch on rewards in general this expansion and the prevalence of RNG. And I think Paragon loot boxes are the perfect example of this. So, Paragon loot boxes made it so that whenever you got exalted with a reputation, you didn't get a mount, you didn't get a reward. You had to farm, you had to keep going, and you had to keep farming up Paragon boxes, and yes, I am butthurt because I still don't have 2, and I've been farming it on 3 characters ever since the day they introduced those boxes, and I'm kind of pissed. But bringing these rewards down to pure RNG does not make them satisfying. At all. It makes them just a pain in the ass, frustrating, and not rewarding. Like, I don't understand this obsession with taking rewards and working towards something and taking that away from the game and replacing it with instant gratification. Oh, Titan Forge. Oh, the mount dropped. That stuff is in the game. You don't need more of it, and Paragon loot boxes just show this change in philosophy, and gladly they're gone in BFA, but it was one of the biggest sticking points for me in Legion, and just that being everywhere in the game annoyed me. Everything was a loot box. Anyway, back to scripted stuff. Look, I spelled conclusion right this time. I'm good at this. Anyway, in conclusion, I loved Legion. Despite all its flaws, despite all the problems that it had, the expansion was really fun. It was a great time, and I played way too much of it. I think the most important thing that Legion did was that it established a groundwork for what a modern World of Warcraft expansion looks like. And the impact of that is going to be felt for many, many expansions to come. The introduction of systems like Mythic Plus and World Quests is going to be a big part of the Legion legacy. Despite all its flaws, Legion is an expansion that did a lot of good for the game and has successfully regained the trust of most of the player base. And it has been a massive financial success for Blizzard. Legion was one of the best expansions we've had in a really long time, and I really, really enjoyed the time that I spent with it, so I would consider that a success. Thanks for watching.